Most likely, most of you today who are viewing this video have heard the terms before, pay it forward. But how can we as transplant patients pay it forward and help others outside of ourselves? Stay tuned and I'll tell you how. Well, hey folks, I appreciate you joining me today on the Transplant Helper podcast / YouTube video series. My name is Jim Merle, and today's topic of discussion is paying it forward. How can you and I, as transplant patients, reach out and help other people who are around us? What can we do to advocate, educate, and encourage? And that's what I like to do on a daily basis, is advocate, educate, and encourage others in their transplant journeys. Now, I'm asked the question a lot, how I got involved in doing the type of work that I do. And by the way, I'm a complete volunteer, and the work that I even do now with my transplant center, I'm not even on the books as a volunteer, but I do it anyway. But how can you get involved in doing something similar to I do? I call myself the transplant helper, but how did I become that, and how can you do the same if you're wanting to give back to those who gave the most to you? And so I want to help you with that a little bit. Let me back up and tell you a little bit about how my journey started years and years ago. Now, this was pre-transplant days. Basically, my journey as to where I am right now is doing this advocacy / educating / encouragement type of work started out of fear. It started out of me facing heart transplant, at least knowing I was going to be facing heart transplant, and being scared to death, not knowing what to do. And it really began with me finding out that there were other people already out there and in my transplant area, my transplant facility, as a matter of fact, who were in hospital, who I could go and speak to and ask them the questions that I was wondering and ask them for the advice that I was seeking at that point in time. And I'll say in the onset, and I'm not knocking them, but my doctors and my medical facility didn't help a lot with that in the beginning. I kind of had to go out and do it on my own. And I physically did that by going, in my case, and finding something known as HTICU, that's Heart Transplant Intensive Care. It's a wing of the hospital, a floor on the hospital where they house transplant patients of my sort, and basically just blindly walking through those double doors into that unit, which was pretty much a quarantine unit at the time, and knocking on some doors, going and knocking on some doors. And when I was asked to come in, introducing myself and just being honest, saying, look, I'm facing heart transplant. I don't know if you've got one yet or not, or what your deal is, but I'm scared to death. And I found out that there were a lot of people on the other side of those doors who were either in my same shoes, and that they were pre-transplant patients, and we just needed to talk and, kind of feel our way through this. But there were also a lot of post-transplant patients, maybe recent transplant patients who were in hospital, who I could go in and they could say, look, life is great. It's a wonderful gift to get a new transplant of any sort, in my case, a heart transplant, and they could help and encourage me and give me some insight as to what life possibly may hold for me in the future. And so that's kind of how I got started. I just jumped in those doors, and I didn't necessarily go to work at that time. I went reaching and begging for information, and I was able to get it. So that's how I got started. But the reason this question is brought up is, again, because I received numerous people who contacted me regularly and want to know how they can help, how they can get into doing the type of, again, advocacy, education type encouragement work that I'm involved in. Particularly, I've got one right here on my phone. He's one of my Twitter followers and friends now, whatever you call that on Twitter. But his name is Brent Butler Jr., and he's found at Brent Butler 98. That's at Brent Butler 98. And I want to encourage you to follow him. He's not young in age necessarily, but he's a newbie to the transplant world. I think he had a kidney transplant recently. And Brent, if you're watching this and I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But nonetheless, he's new to the transplant world. But he sent me a private message the other day and asked this question. I'll read it right off of the phone or the page right here. He said, how do you help people with transplants? I would love to learn, and I want to do the same as well. And again, he's new to the game of transplants, new to the transplant life, but I love the fact that Brent, that you, as well as many others who've asked the question, want to be involved and want to help. And so I want to answer that question for you today. Now, I've already kind of told you a little bit about how I got started, but let me give you a few tips on maybe how you can get started and maybe what's required inside of you in order to get started and kickstart your work as an advocate educator and encourager of other transplant patients. And let me give you these basic tips. Number one, you're going to have to reach in. And sometimes by that, I mean reach into you for the courage just to start. I can remember, even though mine started out of fear, as I've already expressed, it was still a scary thing to go in and meet total strangers and to begin to ask them so many questions, in that case about their personal lives, but I found out that by reaching into myself and getting the courage and overcoming the little bit of anxiety, the edginess that was involved in that, once I did that, I found on the backside of all of those doors very, very friendly people who wanted to be helpful. Probably few of them have ever gone and started doing what I'm doing now, or maybe what you may be doing or desiring to do, I should say, as a transplant patient. But while they were there laying in the hospital, I had a captive audience. So when I went in and asked those questions, they were kind enough and caring and concerned enough to answer those questions. So to begin with, you've got to be able to reach in. Number two, you've got to be able to reach out. And maybe it's by doing what I did. And someone asked me one day, said, how do you start your conversations? How do you deal with people when you first break through that door? You knock, 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 and finally somebody says, come in. You open the door. How awkward is that? Well, again, I'm reaching in for the courage, and then I'm reaching out by that point. And generally what I say, and you could use any variation of this, but generally I just start out very conversational. And I say, hey, you don't know me. And technically in the South, we say, you don't know me from Adam's house cat. That's just comical, whatever that means. But you don't know me from Adam's house cat. But I'm looking for answers about transplant. That was pre-transplant. And now I say, I understand you don't know me and I'm a total stranger, but I'm here to tell you I'm a survivor, and I'm a so many year or day post-transplant. By this point of the video, 4 years post-transplant I'm celebrating, even today. But, I just step in the room and tell them, you don't know me, but we've got something in common. Again, assuming that I'm on the heart transplant, in my case, intensive care floor or wing. Maybe if your lungs, liver, kidney, maybe your transplant facility houses patients of that type in one place, and that's where you begin. That's where you go. And I just walk in the door and say, you don't know me, but we've got something in common, and I want to talk about it. And generally people are so open to that, but that takes reaching out. Now, another way that you can do that, and probably a better way, is if you have the relationship with your transplant team. And I mean by that your doctors, your coordinators, your nurses, whoever. Maybe you can reach out to them first and say, how can I help? Are there any things I can do? Are there any volunteer programs? Are there any support groups I can join? Is there any way in the world I can meet people like I am and then try to give back or pay it forward to them? And so reach out to those people. So whether you do it on cold doors like I did, and I don't mean that negatively, but just doors that I didn't know what was on the other side, or whether maybe a better way, whether you take advice from your transplant team as to where you might start. I'm sure they can help you an awful lot with that. And again, that's a lot of what I do now, is that I have a close relationship with my doctors and my coordinators, and they actually call on me now and say, Jim, can you give a call to this person, or can I have them get your contact information? They call you, or can you swing by the hospital and go in HTICU and sit down with these people and help them out? And I'm always happy to do that. And I work not just with heart patients, but lungs and kidneys and livers and everybody. And that's the way that I do it. I just reach out to them and do what I can. In the third place, after reaching in for the courage to get over that little edginess, that anxiety, and you start reaching out to patients, you have to then reach up. And I have to add this point, because when you go through those doors, especially if you're the post-transplant patient and you're trying to encourage someone, you've got to reach up. There are going to be days when, and I try to be brutally honest on the program. If you watched any of my other episodes, you already know that. I try to level up with you, tell you the truth, and I don't sugarcoat it and try to put it all in medical talk, because I'm not a medical doctor. But you've got to reach up from the perspective of, once you're meeting with those people, whether it be face-to-face or via telephone, or as I'm doing a lot now through these videos, I get a lot of interaction on my Facebook page or on my Twitter page or via my website, my contact page. That's I'm sorry, that's thetransplanthelper.com. I'm going to tell you about another website I have, but thetransplanthelper.com. A lot of people contact me that way, and I have to always keep in mind that I need to reach up for them. That is, while I'm trying to help, I need to do that. Is just that is help. Don't discourage people. I wouldn't say that your bad day is the best day to go in and visit someone. It's probably the case that your bad day is not the best day to try to answer someone's questions. But if you'll reach up a little bit, then you can understand that that's what they need. They need someone to say, okay, life is difficult, but here is the possibilities. Here are the possibilities, or here's the potential outlook for your life. So, I know that hadn't gone in enough detail, but again, I started out myself being afraid, knocking those cold doors, and then after post-transplant, going in those doors, just ready to encourage. I'm here. I don't know you, but I want to help. And so that was a good way of doing it. And it took some reaching in. It took some reaching out. And then even currently, it takes some reaching up to stay positive so that you can be that positive influence on their lives. Again, Brent, I appreciate your question. I appreciate everyone who's ever asked me that question. I'm glad I had time to just stop and to try to communicate that with you via this video. So if this video has helped you in any way, how about give me a thumbs up and like it? If it hadn't helped you and you just didn't want to see my face again, give me a thumbs down. I can deal with that. I can handle that. But if you do that, either way, especially on the like side, how about like, subscribe, and share these videos? Because I just want to reach more people. I still do the face-to-face interaction, but I do these videos now because I know I can reach countless numbers of people, or multitudes of people going through this medium. So I appreciate you watching tonight. And if you're a transplant patient of any sort, stay stronger, friends. Thank you.